Hey guys, this is Tyson James, back with another midweek apologetics video. This week I'm going to be addressing Buddhism, but before I get into that, I wanted to give a little bit of a follow-up on the last video I did on Mormonism. So after I posted that video, I really wanted to get some Mormon reactions to it because in the interest of fairness, I didn't want to be perceived as misinterpreting Mormons or mischaracterizing what they believe. And so I wanted to give them an opportunity to share how they reacted to the video. And so I posted the video to a Mormon Facebook group and got some reactions there, and it led to some very interesting discussions. Some of the Mormons that I spoke with were critical, and some were actually very appreciative, especially of the tone of the video and the fact that I expressed that I hold out hope that in the future maybe they can be brought into the larger family of Christ by accepting the same gospel that we do. I was able actually to share the gospel with a Mormon, which was an incredible opportunity. So these types of videos can really evoke or raise these types of conversations that allow for us Christians to share the gospel. I did want to make a slight edit because there was something in my video that I didn't quite spell out well enough. I made the comment that Mormons don't take the Bible to be reliable. Mormons do take the Bible to be reliable, and so I didn't really spell out what I meant by reliable in that context. What I meant was that they don't take it to be reliable in the same sense as the Book of Mormon. So they believe that the Book of Mormon that they have are the exact words that were related by Joseph Smith and written down by a transcriber. They don't believe that about the Bible. They believe that errors have crept into the text over many centuries. So just to give you a little bit of background, Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, he said, the Book of Mormon was the most correct of any book on earth and the keystone of our religion. And a man would get nearer to God by abiding by its precepts than by any other book. So there it's very clear that the Book of Mormon is considered by Joseph Smith, the founder of Mormonism, to be more reliable than the Bible. Also, in the Latter-day Saints Manual online, you can find this statement. As the Bible was compiled, organized, translated, and transcribed, many errors entered the text. So they would say that the Bible that we have today is not as reliable as the Book of Mormon. Okay, so that's what I meant by reliable. They don't consider the Bible to be as reliable as the Book of Mormon. So I really appreciate the Mormons that took the time to respond to the video, and I hope that more Mormons will address some of the other points on the evidence that I brought up in the video. So back to today's topic, which is Buddhism. Before I kind of delve into Buddhist beliefs, let me give you a little bit of personal background information that's kind of relevant to this topic. My father is from Laos. Obviously, I have some Asian descent. So Laos is a landlocked country, very small country in Southeast Asia, over by Thailand and Cambodia and Vietnam. Laos is a predominantly Buddhist country, and my father and his family were all Buddhists. When he and some of his family immigrated to the United States in the late 1970s, many, including my father, converted to Christianity, mainly as a result of my father converting and marrying my Christian mother. Unfortunately, this was mostly nominal conversion, as almost none of them continued in the Christian faith for very long. As a boy, I actually remember attending a very colorful and elaborate ceremony in which one of my uncles became an official Buddhist monk, complete with a saffron robe and everything. One aunt of mine came and lived with me and my family for a while, and I remember she was always interested in hearing Bible stories, even though she retained her Buddhism. She went on to become a glamorous Laotian pop singer living in California, and I followed her on Facebook, and she clearly has retained her Buddhism, but those influences are probably still in the back of her mind somewhere, hopefully. So because of my mixed family dynamic, the differences between Buddhism and Christianity have a personal importance, and I'm happy to have this opportunity to address those differences today. So like any religion, Buddhism is a huge variety of beliefs. It comes in many different schools, many different forms. And so this introductory apologetics video will focus on what most of the schools of Buddhism have in common and how I approach those points as one who believes that Christianity is true. So first, the founder of Buddhism. His name was Siddhartha Gautama. He lived sometime in the 6th or 5th century BC, around 500 years before Jesus. He lived a really sheltered life in an aristocratic family, and he was sheltered away from the suffering of the world. His father just did not want him to experience all of the suffering and evil in the world. He encountered real suffering for the first time when he went out into the surrounding community. And he was so shocked by what he saw that he spent the next several years trying various methods to free himself of what he perceived was the human predicament. He was said to have found the answer to this search while meditating under a bo tree, and this is called his awakening or his enlightenment. And then he spent his life teaching his method for overcoming the human predicament and achieving enlightenment. Later he was called Shakyamuni, which means the Shakyan sage. Shakyan was the people that he came from. And then later he was known as the Buddha, which literally means the enlightened one. So a couple of fun facts. The earliest biography of Buddha dates to the 1st century AD. So that's nearly 500 years after his life. And the earliest existing mention of him that we have is from around 300 years after his life. So by contrast, the earliest information we have for Jesus dates to within 3 to 5 years after he died. Buddhism today is the 4th largest religion in the world, with over 500 followers worldwide. So I mentioned Buddha's treatment of the human predicament. And his assessment of the human predicament and its resolution kind of resembles a physician diagnosing an illness. And it's summarized in what's called the 4 Noble Truths. And this is something shared by most schools of Buddhism. Number 1, a physician might ask, what is the symptom? Well, Buddha saw it as the suffering or pain of loss. And this is called dukkha. Number 2, what is the cause of this suffering? To him, he saw the cause as desire or attachment to permanence. Number 3, what is the purpose of treating this cause of suffering? To him, the purpose was to rid oneself of the attachment to permanence that causes the suffering. So getting rid of that holding on to the permanence in life. And number 4, how do you go about treating this disease? Buddha taught that you could overcome this attachment to permanence, this desire that causes suffering, by what's called the Eightfold Path. And this includes right knowledge, right aim or purpose, right speech, right action, right living, right effort, and right mindfulness. Other concepts that were affirmed by the Buddha include samsara, which is the cycle of rebirth. You may be familiar with that from Hinduism, which Buddhism came out of. So he also affirmed the cycle of rebirth, so you die and are reborn again. In Hinduism, however, only people of high social level or caste could escape the cycle of rebirth. That escape is called moksha, or salvation from the cycle of rebirth. Buddha rejected that. He said that anybody could achieve salvation, regardless of caste. He also affirmed karma. You may have heard of karma also from Hinduism. But for Buddha, karma was a little bit different. He thought of it as the psychological grasping for permanence. And so he wanted to get rid of the psychological state of desire or grasping for permanence. Whereas in Hinduism, karma is about action and reaction or cause and effect. Buddha also affirmed nirvana, which is a psychological state of detachment, like I said, that allows one to overcome suffering and to escape the cycle of rebirth. Nirvana literally means extinguishing or blowing out, which is kind of a symbolic imagery for the psychological detachment from permanence. He also affirmed anatta or anatman, which is the concept or doctrine that there is no soul that serves to seat consciousness and the enduring self. To Buddha, there is no enduring self. Rather, the enduring self is considered an illusion of consciousness, which consciousness itself is caused by a combination of various things working together to generate an illusion of consciousness. At death, he believed that these things come apart and that this particular illusion of self that each one of us has ceases to exist. Unfortunately, there were some concepts that Buddha didn't really attempt to address, such as whether or not the universe is eternal or finite, whether consciousness it continues after death, whether there's an afterlife outside of the cycle of rebirth, whether God exists and interacts with the world. All of those things that a lot of people find to be important questions. Instead, Buddha was more preoccupied with human psychology, and that was because of his own struggle with his own mind and his experience with suffering. And so he sought for many years to overcome that suffering, and then when he began to teach, he wanted to help other people overcome that suffering as well. So it has more to do with human psychology than the sort of big metaphysical questions about ultimate reality. Many schools of Buddhism have developed over the centuries and have tried to address some of these other questions, but these are generally not representative of the earlier shared Buddhist tradition. So why is Buddhism attractive? Well, number one, it addresses the problematic experience shared by all humanity, and that's suffering. Number two, it offers a solution to that problem through the Eightfold Path. And number three, that solution is universally accessible. So this is very attractive because there are people suffering everywhere and everybody has this experience, and it's not very attractive to say that the solution is only available to people of high birth, right? That was something that Buddha was very much against. So how does Buddhism compare with Christianity? Well, you've probably already seen some differences, but let's start with some of the areas of similarity that are very interesting and that can serve as conversational bridges with Buddhists. Number one, there's a human predicament experienced by all of humanity, as I mentioned. The goal of life is overcoming that predicament. The resolution is available to everyone, not just a privileged group or class of people. In both Christianity and Buddhism, there's a central figure, and obviously Buddha in Buddhism and Jesus in Christianity. There is a high value placed on community. Community for the Buddhists is called the Sangha, and for Christianity, we have the church. Both are very important in both religions. There are scriptures in both religions that teach the path to salvation. In Buddhism, they have what's called the Tripitaka, or the three baskets, which contain the teachings for the path of salvation. And of course, in Christianity, we have the Bible, which shares the gospel of Jesus Christ. I noted in the beginning that Buddha's assessment of the predicament and treatment was kind of like a physician going about his task. For Christians, the symptoms are similar, but the cause or the diagnosis is very different, right? We affirm that there is illness, aging, addiction, broken relationships, suffering, death. All of these we take to be the result of sin against God, going against God's commandments and his standard of holiness. That's opposed to the Buddhist concept. It's not just desire or attachment to permanence as Buddhism teaches. And sin is not only the cause of suffering in this life, but because it is a crime against an infinite God, the one who sins deserves an infinite punishment. And so the punishment is to last for eternity. The treatment is also very different. Rather than following an eightfold path to enlightenment, which requires personal effort, the cure in Christianity is offered to all as a free gift, which we can accept by trusting in Jesus Christ. He was punished in our place and offers forgiveness and eternal life. Also, the goal of Christianity is nearly the mirror opposite of Buddhism. The goal of Buddhism is psychological detachment from all permanence and the realization that there is no enduring self. However, the goal of Christianity is permanent attachment to God, who is the source of life itself. But, and understand this, permanent attachment is only possible if there is an enduring self that can do the attaching. Buddhism teaches that all things change and nothing is permanent. Christianity teaches that God does not change and that Jesus Christ is the same yesterday, today, and forever. So we have these conflicting views now, and then the ultimate question, the natural question that follows is, who got it right, the Buddha or Jesus? Well, since Buddhism and Christianity both have very different problems with very different solutions, they can't both be right. The only possibilities are that one of them is right or both of them are wrong. Of course, as a Christian, I do believe that Christianity is true. And so if Christianity is true, then I think it logically follows that Buddhism is not true in those areas where it teaches things that are contrary to Christianity. So how do I make the case for that? Well, here's how I know that Christianity is true and Buddhism is not. Number one, the existence of God is demonstrated by the contingency and finitude of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe for intelligent life, the existence of objective morals, and many other things. These are just a few of the dozens of arguments which demonstrate God's existence. Number two, that this is the Christian God is demonstrated by the historical evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ. The resurrection is not a claim that needs to be taken on blind faith, as many Christians perhaps mistakenly think. But it is overwhelmingly supported by the historical evidence. The evidence for the miracle of the resurrection of Jesus is actually much better than the evidence for just the existence of Buddha. So if you've never been exposed to that evidence, I highly recommend that you check out some sources. So these demonstrations for the existence of God and the resurrection of Jesus are based on publicly accessible evidence, which is available to everyone. Buddhism is different in that Buddhism is based primarily on the Buddha's testimony of personal enlightenment, his experience of personal enlightenment. And as I noted in my previous video on Mormonism, testimony of personal experiences are interesting, but they're not publicly accessible. You don't have access to another person's first-person experience. So this is why I think that having arguments and evidence is so important for Christians. If we don't find personal experience of people from other religions compelling, then why should we expect them to find our experience of our relationship with Jesus Christ compelling? So as Christians, we want to be able to share the gospel of salvation through Jesus Christ If we want to do that, we need to be prepared to share more than just our personal testimonies. Unfortunately, I don't have time in this video to share all of the evidences, but if you want a really good starter resource on this topic, I highly suggest this book. It's called On Guard for Students by Dr. William Lane Craig. Of course, I've gotten a lot of use out of this book, but this is a great beginner's book for delving into the arguments and evidence for the existence of God and specifically for the truth of Christianity. So that's all for today. I do have a bonus question before I let you go. So the bonus question is this. Many atheists today claim that morality is something that developed through the evolutionary process in order for us to survive. Okay? Just as ants and primates cooperate to share food and protect each other, humans developed cooperative behavior like social norms and legal systems as survival mechanisms. If this is true, then it doesn't seem like God is necessary for the morality we all seem to affirm. If somebody made that claim to you, how would you respond? If you think you have a good answer, drop it in the comments below or message me on Facebook. Talk to you later.